Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Public Safety Government Operations Joint Committee meeting. Council member, Council Chair Nancy Navarro has allowed me, very graciously allowed me to run this joint meeting. But we will be doing it as a joint meeting. I understand. We have two items. The first one is a supplemental appropriation to county government's FY21 operating budget, Office of the County Executive, for $550,000 to support a police audit, fire and rescue service audit, and consulting funds for community engagement support, source of funds, general fund, undesignated reserves. The second item is a resolution to amend FY21 operating budget resolution 19-472, Section D, designation of entities for non-competitive contract award status, effective law enforcement for all, Inc. And before I ask Ms. Farag if she would please begin, Council Chair Navarro, do you have any statements before we begin?
Thank you very much, Council President. And I basically just want to set the context. Obviously, these requests are very much tied to ongoing efforts in the county to examine best practices and also to enhance community engagement and trust in our law enforcement as well. And it does, I think, dovetail very nicely with some of the activities and decisions that we have made. Namely, for example, we did approve the Policing Advisory Commission. We also have the Montgomery County Public Schools examination of school resource officers, and of course the task force to reimagine public safety. These particular special appropriations, I think, are very important. The consulting firm Effective Law Enforcement for All, which is a Silver Spring based organization, I think most of you had an opportunity, if not all, to have conversations with the work that they have done around the country. And I think it's a very productive and I would say proactive approach that they have taken around the country, because there's just a lot of, I think, misunderstanding around this issue of reimagining public safety. And what we're trying to do here is make sure that we move closer and closer to a space where we can preserve, obviously, number one, the public safety of all our residents, but most importantly, that we can be sure that the trust is there and that the best practices are implemented. So I really do look forward to how these requests, the special appropriation, these dollars are going to be used. Do have some questions about the fire audit, the fire and rescue service audit. I don't think we had a lot of information. I don't know if we received any additional information, so I do have some concerns about that. But I think in general, this will, I think, it will take us a step closer to address some of the issues that I know our residents have brought up. And there's just been so much conversation. And the Public Safety Committee, of course, has been really active in pursuing and examining these. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Council President.
Thank you very much. Ms. Farag, if you could please begin the packet.
Sure. As Chair Navarro has pointed out, there are several initiatives that are going on currently in the county to help look at police department activities and to ensure public safety services for every community within the county. This particular supplemental appropriation deals with the county executive initiatives, and that includes the task force to reimagine public safety. It will also fund a racial bias audit of the police department. The original allocations under the supplemental appropriation indicated $200,000 for an audit of the police department, $200,000 for an audit of the fire and rescue department, and $150,000 for community engagement support. That has been tweaked a bit now, and the police department audit will be for $275,000, and the community engagement piece will be for $75,000. So it's the same amount, just different allocations. As Chair Navarro also mentioned, there's a fire department audit, which we'll get to in a minute. We are going to start with police, since that is at the forefront right now and on everybody's mind, and we have those several initiatives already underway. These funds would pay for an audit and facilitating the work of the task force to reimagine public safety. So there are several moving parts, things that the consultant is going to be asked to do simultaneously. They will investigate the police department, conduct research findings, and provide some preliminary findings on that in the spring. But at the same time, the consultant is supposed to help the task force to reimagine public safety and facilitate their work. The task force to reimagine public safety will provide its own report in January 2021. And based off of those recommendations, those would provide at least an initial starting place for council and the county executive if they want to make any changes to police department operations or policies or even laws at this point. They will not be writing the report for the task force. The task force will be responsible for their own report, but they will facilitate that work and provide information that they have found investigating the police department as far as the audit is concerned. My concern was that an official final audit would be provided at the end of this, and it's my understanding that it will. The county executive has indicated that might take 12 to 18 months to produce, so it would be helpful if we understood that timeline a little bit better. And of my examination of different types of audits to this extent, the consultant either provides an ongoing monitoring or oversight function for the recommendations that have been made and whether or not, the county executive or the council wants to implement those. And I think that provides some transparency and accountability that the county is actually doing what it's trying to do and whether or not that those recommendations are making any difference in the way that the county wants them to be made. So I'm recommending at this point, depending on the discussions today, that the council or the county executive consider either extending this contract to provide that oversight function if the consultant can provide that service, or look for another independent entity to provide that once the audit results come back. The scope of work is attached for your review at circles 4 through 8. There's an estimated timeline on page 3 for you. Again, they will start work as soon as the contract has been awarded, and that includes the facilitating work for the task force and the audit of the police department. They've indicated the task force report will be issued in January 2021 and preliminary audit findings sometime in the spring. And again, I'm not sure what time the final audit findings and recommendations will be provided. And that brings us to the fire department audit as well, which still has $200,000 budgeted under this supplemental appropriation. I did ask for a scope of work, and that's apparently a draft in process that is to be reviewed by the county attorney, so I have not yet seen that. Everybody has geared up for the police audit, and the fire audit has come in secondary, it seems. And that is one question that I do have for the joint committee and the county executive is, what do they think a realistic timeline is for the fire audit, and whether or not that $200,000 would better be allocated in the FY22 budget instead of for this supplemental appropriation. So.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I wanted to welcome Chief Marcus Jones from the police department. He is with us as well. I don't know who wants to answer some of these questions, whether it be Chief Jones or whether it's Ms. Sturgis or whoever. But we do have some questions that we want to ask about the first off, the time frame for the police department audit, and does the goal of providing preliminary findings by this spring constrain the scope of this audit in any way? I don't know whether Chief or Ms. Sturgis or whoever would like to answer that, please. How are you, Ms. Sturgis?
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you, Council President Katz, and good afternoon to all of the other council members and everyone else joining us on the call. So yes, I'll be more than happy to answer the questions. Let's see, the first one that I heard was, will receiving a report in the spring hinder the work that we're doing? Absolutely not. We have had conversations with our consultant, potential consultant, ELE4A, Mr. Douglas, as well as Dr. Burns are both on this conference and would be available to answer more details on that. The work will be collaborated. They will begin as soon as we are able to have a contract in place. Throughout that, there will be discussions, not only with the county executive's office, but also with the police chief Jones. So we feel confident that throughout this, as they are finding any items that may require immediate attention, that those things will be brought to our attention and addressed at that time. So we're confident that receiving a preliminary report in the spring will be sufficient. In advance of that, we are requesting that the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force provide a report in January of their recommendations for how the community would envision the police department as well as public safety. Those recommendations will be used to help craft the budget for next fiscal year. I will try to also address another question that I heard from Ms. Farag regarding the timeline for the fire and rescue audit. That is correct. We are in the process of finalizing the statement of work. One has been drafted in collaboration with fire and rescue and other departments, including OMB, as well as the county executive's office. That is being reviewed by the county attorney, so we are in the final stages of having that finalized. We anticipate that going through a open procurement process. The urgency for the fire and rescue service audit is not as sensitive as the police audit, which is why we started with the police audit. We anticipate putting that solicitation out during this fiscal year. That's why it was included in this supplemental appropriation. So we anticipate a contract being made this fiscal year. So yes, we would like to proceed with both of those. I hope I addressed the two questions that I heard.
Well, and you did. I mean, but and I think you even touched on this one. But the next question that was brought up was whether preliminary findings provide the opportunity to examine certain areas in more depth if needed, or expand the scope to other areas of police operations. Is the final report expected in late 2021?
So what we've been informed by ELE 4A is that the final report, I'm sorry, President Katz, is that for the police audit?
Yes, police, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, all of these are going to deal with police, I think, pretty much, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we anticipate the preliminary being available in the spring, but I will defer to ELE 4A for a response on when the final report would be made available. During our conversation, the scope of our audit is so broad that we understood that it could range anywhere from 12 to 18 months. The proposal that ELE 4A has presented us, they allocated enough resources to ensure that we would be able to get a preliminary report within 6 months time frame, which is putting us in the spring of 2021. But I will allow them to elaborate further on that, as they are the experts.
Please, if someone would like to elaborate, please.
I'm happy to do that. Yes, as Ms. Sturgis was
please identify
explaining.
yourself, Mr. Douglas. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm David Douglas. I'm the president of Effective Law Enforcement for All. And I was going to say and I'm pleased to be here and thank you for the opportunity. The scope of the work is both broad and it came together quite rapidly. So one of the challenges here is meeting the council's needs and objectives without yet having a complete understanding of the data sources, information that is available for us to review and how accessible. Nevertheless, in putting together the proposal, we believe we've achieved the right balance so that we can answer the council's questions and provide a meaningful report by spring of 2021. But to the extent there's some additional work or other areas that need to be addressed, we can work those into the process as well.
Very good. Thank you. And I'm asking the questions in general, and Ms. Sturgis is certainly the one, I guess, who's going to answer most of them. But if anybody else on the panel wants to jump in, please do not be shy and do not hesitate. The police department changed leadership last November when Chief Jones, and we're very glad he's here, was sworn in. The chief has proposed a reorganization plan that would better align the department to meet community needs and expectations. Will the audit examine this proposal to see if it helps meet identified needs and services and service delivery, or will the audit otherwise take the plan into account when developing audit recommendations? Who is going to answer that one? Ms. Sturgis?
I could speak to that at least.
Okay, please.
To the extent that it's a fairly broad audit, so we would look at all functions within the scope of the audit within the police department, so we would anticipate working with Chief Jones to understand all those systems, including some of the changes that he would consider making, so they would necessarily fall within the ambit of what we're examining, and we would certainly provide Chief Jones our views to the extent he's interested in them concerning these changes, and we would certainly comment on the efficacy of those changes in the course of our work.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see Ms. Sturgis on. I didn't think the questions were that tough, Ms. Sturgis, that you had to leave. Are you on, Caroline?
I think she froze, so I don't know if she's having
That
issues.
could be. I don't even.
Lost some connection.
Okay. Well, we're going to hold on for a second till she can reconnect, please. Ms. Parsons, do we know if we're having any luck in reconnecting, or if Ms. Sturgis is having any luck reconnecting?
I do not see Miss Sturgis in the waiting room just yet, but I will keep my eyes open for her.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, she's in the process of joining
She
us.
is back. You know, Caroline, I said I didn't think these questions were that tough that you wanted to leave the meeting. Are you there, Caroline?
Yes, I am. I am so sorry about that. I lost.
It happens. I said while you were gone, I didn't think these questions were that tough that you wanted to leave the meeting. But anyway,
My apologies.
not a problem. Believe me, we all understand. We've all been there, and I'm sure maybe it'll happen again today for some of us. The next question that we have is that how will this audit approach the examination of school resource officers, and will the vendor be able to work with MCPS to access any of the information that's been gathering for its own report?
So yes, so the audit will do a comprehensive top to bottom review of the police programs that will include looking at the school resource officers. However, we do not, the scope does not include an evaluation with Montgomery County Public School System. So the information that we receive will be that gathered from the police department. We can reach to the school system and gather information from there, and if they're cooperative throughout this process, that will be included in the evaluation of the program.
Okay. Police department's audits.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, can I
Yes, please.
ask a
Yes,
follow-up?
please. I'm sorry.
Thank you. So this is a really important issue, obviously, because as we know, the Board of Education is doing its own study to determine which direction they want to go with the SRO program, whether it's going to be some variation of that program. And so I don't think it serves us to have sort of parallel processes going on. MCPS always collaborates, for example, with the Office of Legislative Oversight and other efforts. And so I think there should be some type of memorandum of understanding or something to that effect, because at the end of the day, it is the Board of Education. I mean, it's their schools, right? So we need to make sure that we are taking, having the full benefit of the analysis that they're making et cetera. This is why, for example, when Councilmember Jawando brought forth the proposal to eliminate SROs, I was not in support of that because I felt that the school system, the Board of Education, should have the opportunity to do their due diligence, their review, et cetera. And we should incorporate that into whatever we're doing and then make informed decision, not just eliminate something without having, another sort of program or something in place. So I think this is a very important component, and I don't feel comfortable hearing that, that we would be working in some sort of parallel fashion or just, hoping that the school system would collaborate. This needs to be, I think, formalized.
And I agree with that assessment. Ms. Sturgis, and I don't know if others, I didn't see anybody else jumping up and down that they disagree, but Ms. Sturgis, would you please keep that in mind? I do think that it's logical for the Board of Education to make their findings before we do anything.
Understood, and I apologize if there's any confusion on that. Yes, we are aware that the Board of Education is doing an evaluation of that of their school resources program. Our audit is looking at all of the programs within the police department, so there is that component of it. So there will be some areas that will be looked at, but of course our audit will not be providing a recommendation on the future of the SRO program. That is, of course, will be at the discretion of the Board of Education. But in looking at all of the programs within the police department, it is a program of the police department that will have some cursory look from the consultant.
Okay. The next question is, police department audits often provide or recommend a monitoring oversight function where the firm monitors any changes that have been implemented to determine if they are affecting the desired outcomes. This contract does not provide for that task. Instead, the executive advises that the new civilian assistant chief will be responsible for overseeing the impact of any changes made in police policy and operations. Our staff is certainly suggesting, and I agree, that the executive and the council consider expanding the scope of the work for this contract or hiring an independent audit or oversight firm at a later time to track the progress of any adopted recommendations. The advantage of an independent firm is the provision of greater transparency and accountability to the public to help ensure that the county is making recommended changes and measuring outcomes. I don't know that, did you want to comment on that, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That is a good question, and I don't believe we are opposed to hiring an independent consultant or even expanding this contract to include the monitoring and oversight of the recommendations once they are presented to us. So that is something that we are open to looking at. Originally with our current statement of work, that was not included in there, but absolutely by no means we are not opposed to reconsidering that.
Okay. And the last one is that, because you've already answered about the time frame, but while the scope of work for the fire department audit has not been finalized, it would be helpful if the executive provided a brief summary of what is expected. For example, will there be a racial bias component for MCFRS as well? And I do, and I know others are going to comment, but I do have concerns that we would be approving something today, or we're being asked to approve something today in a tune of $200,000 when we don't know what the scope of work would be for the fire and rescue. So I have concerns about that, even though we can come back and have another public joint meeting on it. But I am concerned about that we literally don't know what we might be buying.
Sure, I can comment on that, and then I can allow Chief Goldstein to expand if he wants to. The scope of work that we're looking at is two components within the fire audit. The first area we want to look at is a workload analysis based on community needs, as well as a staffing study to ensure that the fire and rescue services is operating as efficiently as possible. So that is one of the key areas that the audit will focus on. The second component of the audit does have a diversity and racial equity component of it. We want to look both internally as well as externally of diversity and equity within the department to see to see the relationship with fire and rescue in the community. Through that, we will be asking for a climate survey of the personnel in the fire department, as well as the volunteer firefighters, to get a gauge, a pulse on the culture of the department. We also want to evaluate interaction with the community on what their experience as well as expectations are for fire and rescue services. So as I mentioned early on, we are in the final stages of developing that statement of work. As we did with the police audit, as soon as we have it in a shape that we feel is sufficient enough to share, we will definitely share it with council before we move through with the procurement process of putting a solicitation out on the
Thank you. Council, Government Operations Chair, Councilmember Navarro, would you like to ask some questions, please?
Thank you. So as I was reviewing this packet, one of the things that jumped at me was the fact that, this council passed the racial equity and social justice law last year, and there is a requirement in that law that whenever the executive is proposing any managerial changes or any budgetary, budget related request, that there has to be some analysis, a note that basically addresses the issue of racial equity and social justice. So how will this proposal either, enhance and or work against, because that is the whole point of this law. And so I am really dismayed that here we are in September, and the executive has not even done the method to regulations, right? I mean, we don't even have anything. And so I want to just put that out there in the record, because again, the whole point, the one particular reason why we worked so hard to, a whole year to get to this place was precisely so we wouldn't have to, at every single proposal, have to ask these questions. The point is that it's integrated. The point is that every time there is such a, for example, request such as this one, that the administration has to then present how does this integrate? What are those components of racial equity and social justice that this seeks to alleviate or to address? And then we get into that pattern and that routine. So that's a real concern that I have, and I just want to put this on record. I am sending a memo over because this is now the law. And, I spoke to our attorney and he said, well, there's no way that we can force the executive to follow the law, which is insane. But we need to get that done. That is critical. And so I appreciate Ms. Farag putting this into the packet, but we shouldn't even have to have it in the packet because it's now the law, it's the requirement. The other issue is that I do feel a little bit uncomfortable because I don't think it's very rare that we would be asked to approve a special appropriation of like $200,000, but then be told that we will have an update on what is going to be included in the scope of work for the $200,000. That's not how we operate. I mean, usually, our analyst works with the administration. There's obviously the information that comes forward. The council members can then examine that information via the packets, et cetera, if we have questions, because then that information was not, provided to Ms. Farag. And so I feel very uncomfortable, just as a matter of practice and good government, to raise my hand to appropriate $200,000 when I'm hearing for the first time from you, Ms. Sturgis, what are the broad, I think, components of this audit, and then you're saying that, though you'll follow up. So again, I just don't feel comfortable. I think that the rest of the special appropriation, obviously it's something that we have been briefed, we've talked about. I feel comfortable with that, but the piece around the fire and rescue is just very odd. Like, I don't recall having to, vote on something like this without the proper information, detailed scope, et cetera, because at the end of the day, we have to respond to our taxpayers and our constituents and explain why it is that we have made this appropriation. So I just want to say that, I guess at some point we'll have to take a vote, but I just feel, feel like we really were due a lot more information than what we received.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
First off, I just want to echo everything that the Government Operations Chair just said. I agree wholeheartedly on that. I'm not comfortable in approving the fire rescue service piece of this on the context that we don't know anything about. I just don't think it's an appropriate way for us to function. The police is a bit different. That seems to be fleshed out. There seems to be a clear understanding of what that will look like, and I think the moment in time that we are in and the public demands for what the expectations are, that is very clear to me, and I have a pretty good understanding. I also think that the county executive talked about that. When back in, I believe, June, he raised the prospect of bringing in an outside firm and discussed that, and this is ultimately what that looked like. I also will point out that if I remember, it feels like years ago, but when Chief Jones was appointed, one of the commitments that he made to us and to the public was doing this type of racial equity audit as part of his reorganization of the department and looking at the different policies and procedures with it. And so, to me, this is following through on that. Now, where I am confused is whether and why not these items were proposed in the county executive's recommended budget, because I know Chief Jones had been working on this, had committed to this to the council. It was well known that this was an area that we were going to move forward on. It did not just start with the major national and local events that have taken place over the last few months. And on the fire rescue service, there's been a commitment since the county executive took office with adding new positions as part of a broader effort to reorganize that agency to try to address the long-standing overtime challenges and the staffing deficiencies that the previous council, the previous county executive, this county executive, when he was public safety chair, had talked about frequently, both in informal settings and not. So I just wanted to ask, were these items included in the budget? And if they were not in the recommended budget, why weren't they? Because these seem to be things that have been discussed and contemplated for months, if not years.
So I'll take a stab at answering this, and then I will defer it to our OMB. I believe Rachel is on. I'm not sure if Trevor is on to discuss in specific what was included in the recommended budget. I know for the Reimagining Public Safety initiative, when that was announced in June and we started organizing the work around that, we realized that we would require additional resources to help support this initiative. So that was not in the fiscal 21's recommended budget. That was crafted prior to the June's announcement. Councilman Friedson, you are correct that we did have discussions about doing a police audit. I know the police chief had worked on a statement of work, and that would have been absorbed underneath the police chief's, the police department's budget. Bringing on a task force at the scale of our task force being about 80 individuals. I'm not sure I found any other jurisdiction that has a task force that large, and organizing all of that work. Realized that we had to dedicate some sort of resources to help in facilitating and organizing all of that work. So we identified that was another area that needed funding. The fire department's budget, absolutely right. There has been a couple of years of budget deficiencies there. And I know that in this year's budget, there was additional resources to the fire department, but I still don't believe it's at the level that the fire department needs. In order to make decisions on additional resources to fire, we thought it would be prudent to have a comprehensive audit of the fire department to ensure that we could identify current efficiencies that can be made before identifying additional resources and dollar amounts. So that is one of the attempt of the audit is to examine the efficiency of the department, also to compare it against the community needs to ensure that our resources are appropriately being allocated now. And then with that, I will pause and allow the budget team to provide more specific information on what was included in the 21's budget.
Hi, Rachel Silverman with OMB. Yeah, I just want to echo everything Carolyn just said. I think the idea was as long as this audit was moving forward for MCPS, kind of in tandem with the police audits, the executive's office wanted to take that opportunity to also then look at some of these overtime factors that have been at issue over several budget years.
Okay, so the answer is no. These were not included in the budget, even though there was discussion, had longstanding been discussions of looking at the overtime issues. That seems to be quite different than what we're talking about here, but I appreciate that. So that's a new item. I think it should be separated out. I don't think it has anything to do with what we're talking about here. I was, frankly, a little bit surprised when we got this item. It was never discussed publicly or privately with any of us that fire rescue was part of what was going to be looked at. In terms of not being in the budget, I'm still confused as to why the police, originally it was going to be absorbed within the police department, either $200,000 or $275,000. Only $75,000 of this is being used for the reimagining public safety, unless I'm missing something.
Yes.
So before it was going to be absorbed by the police department, but now it's not going to be because there's a task force that has 80 members of it, where 75,000 of the 275,000.
So
explain that to me.
Yeah. So it was anticipated that the police department would have absorbed it in their fiscal 2020's budget, was when they would have absorbed it. When we looked into fiscal 21, we rolled into a new fiscal year, and that's why we thought that since it's a new fiscal year, that we would have the contract be coming out of the county executive's office. And with that, the county executive's office would require, since we would be overseeing the contract and not the police department, although the consultant will be working closely with the police department, the contract would be overseen by the county executive's office. Therefore, the county executive's office did not have the budget to support this contract.
Okay, so since it was delayed in happening, and because the county executive wanted to take it over as opposed to having it housed in the police department, it is a supplemental in this budget as opposed to as part of the regular budget.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Okay, that's helpful. The last thing that I would just ask, I do think it's related to this contract and slightly separate, but I think it would be helpful, and we've discussed this before. I met with you and the ELE 4A folks, and there's obviously a lot of expertise there. I think it will be very helpful to the county. I think it's a very important issue, but I don't think there's a lot of clarity for who's responsible for what. There's a lot of different efforts going on. We have the Police Advisory Commission. We have the Reimagining Police Task Force. We have this new consultant. It seemed to me that there are different issues, one related to budget and what the budget for the police department should look like, one related to policies, and another one related to the organization itself. But I think it would be helpful as part of this effort to really make clear which of these entities and which of these efforts is going to be responsible for what, because just like the conversation earlier with the school resource officers and how that process was going to work, it does feel like there are a number of parallel efforts, and the focus of each of those efforts has not been made particularly clear, I think, to the folks who are involved in them, and also especially and most importantly to the public. So I've raised that privately. I thought I would raise it publicly. I won't go into more detail than that, but I think it's a really important issue, and I just shared the point made earlier by Councilmember Navarro that I think we should move forward on the police aspect of this, but share staff and her concerns about moving forward with the fire rescue service. I think that should either be part of the next budget which is the process we normally undertake, and the county executive's already begun that community outreach effort to figure out what folks want in the next budget. Or it should come back as an emergency supplemental, which is what supplementals are supposed to be, with a clear understanding of exactly what the money is going to be used for. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other committee members that have asked to speak. Would any of the other committee members like to speak? If not, if someone would like to make a motion, please. Would someone like to make a motion?
Yeah, I will move approval based on the staff recommendation of the police contract, but not the fire rescue service contract.
Okay. Is there a second? Was that you, Councilmember Navarro? It's been seconded. Thank you. It has been moved and seconded that we go with the staff suggestion that for the police and not for the fire and rescue at this time. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And I count 5, and that's what we have. It was carried unanimously. Thank you. We have one other item today. If I can figure out where it is. Here it is. And that is to amend the FY 2021 operating budget, Resolution 19-472, Section G, Fiscal Year 2021, designation of entities for a non-competitive contract award status. Ms. Farag, would you like to lead us through that, please?
Sure. As you stated, this is a budget amendment to the current fiscal year that will allow for the non-competitive contract award specifically to Effective Law Enforcement for All, or ELE4A. It's in the amount of $350,000 that you just discussed in the supplemental appropriation. I believe all council members have spoken to this proposed consultant. Council staff is recommending approval as provided.
Thank you. Let me just say that I know I met with Mr. Douglas and Dr. Burns and was extremely impressed by them. I was not only impressed by them, but by others who they have associated with them. I don't know how many remember the former police chief, Marianne Viverette from the city of Gaithersburg, but she is associated with them. She was the first female police chief in the history, president in the history of the International Chiefs of Police in their 109-year history. While she was the police chief of the city of Gaithersburg, I am very impressed with the entire group, and I will be supporting this. Anybody else, please? Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would agree. I think that I was, very pleased with how comprehensive the expertise is and contained in this group. I felt that when we really got into the weeds about best practices, especially in terms of community engagement, cultural proficiency, which is so important to a county like ours that is so complex, they definitely have a very, extensive wealth of experience doing that. So they understand the grassroots, they understand the cultural nuances, but they also understand the macro, needs of a county like ours when it comes to public safety and how important for us, public safety is. I mean, it's one of those tenets of quality of life. And so I like that balance. I like the fact that they have, people in their group and their cohort that are law enforcement officials, as well as people who have looked at this from a social science perspective. And so, yeah, I was super impressed. I mean, they checked all my boxes, and definitely will be voting for this appropriation. Thank you.
Very good. Any other comments, or if not, is there a motion? Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I'll make the motion. I just echo all the comments made. I was very impressed when I had the chance to meet with the LE4A. Look forward to the work product and for all the expertise that they bring to bear that we don't necessarily have in the county, and I would move approval of the non-competitive contract.
Okay, Vice President Hucker, Council Chair Navarro got in just a second before you for this thing, just a second. Yeah. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is 5-0. Thank you very much. That passes. Ms. Farag, did you have anything else for us today?
No, these are tentatively scheduled to go before council for action on the 29th.
Very good. Thank you very much. And with that, thank you everyone for being with us. This meeting is adjourned.